Hello, everyone. I can see that people are joining. We're expecting people to join for the next few seconds, maybe even a whole minute. So we thought that we'd keep us engaged by asking you to take part in this very brief survey. If you get your phones out and take a photo of the Slido QR code, you'll get to a very short survey, and out of interest, it would be wonderful to see how you vote. So while we're all waiting for the webinar to begin properly, please have a look at the Slido and please tell us your thoughts. Hey, there you go. It's all zooming along very quickly now. We're seeing from the Slido output, thank you everyone for taking part. And if you're still joining, feel free to very quickly take a snapshot of the Slido QR code and make a quick vote. It's not a lengthy voting procedure, it's just one vote. And we're just using it as an introduction, as a way to bring us in the room together. Rather than be passive, we'd love it if you're active. And this is our first attempt to encourage that proactivity. We're all interested in the challenge of the twin transitions of green and digital. Are they twin? Do they help each other? Do they get in the way of each other? Are there clever things that some people are doing that the rest of us can learn from? Those are the types of things that the Just Transform project has been looking for. And so welcome to the webinar, and you'll be getting some great information from Hilde and Jennifer very soon. Now, I've got all excited about the Slido vote, but I'm going to ask us to move on, I'm afraid, so that we can start the webinar properly. I'm Steve Evans. I would like to welcome you to the seminar. If we can have the next slide, please. So I'm one of the helpers of the key team of Hilde and Jennifer, who will be speaking to you today. And they've given me the task of introducing them and the project so that they can concentrate on the hard bit and the important bit. So welcome, everyone. My job is to make sure that when you're taking part in the seminar, that you kindly put yourself on mute during the main part of the seminar. By all means, type questions into the chat while the seminar is going on, but we won't be reacting to them until the Q&A session at the end. So we're going to get two presentations, an introduction to the project from Hilde and the presentation of the key findings to date from Jennifer. Many of you who have joined were actually part of the data collection. All of you are people who have expertise in this subject area. And so one of the things that we're interested in is whether the things that we're going to be presenting to you today are a bit of a surprise. Do they align with your views of the world? And we really want you to be opinionated, to listen, to learn, but also to be opinionated, and for that set of opinions to come into the question and answer session, which is quite long. We want a really good chat amongst ourselves for the latter half of the webinar. So welcome everyone. I hope you're all feeling safe and comfortable, fed and watered, and we'll move on to Professor Hilde Corneliussen, who is going to introduce the project.
Thank you. Yeah, so this project is funded by the Norwegian Research Council for 3 years, 2024 through 2026, and it has the short name Just Transform, and we aim to find out how we can make the green and digital transitions, whether twin or not, become a holistic, sustainable, just and inclusive transformation. So in this project, we have big ambitions. The first year we have been working on policy strategies, exploring them at a global level, European, and also down to the national Norwegian level to investigate how narratives of these transitions, the green and the digital, are played out in policy strategies. We are also underway with the field work where we, in Norway, do both visits to company and interviews with businesses, employers, organizations that are engaged in the green transition, and we use for this the region around the Western Norway Research Institute and Norce, the two main research partners in Norway, on the west coast of Norway, where we will visit a lot of companies in that are engaged in Green Region Vestland. So that's like a regional initiative, making it possible for us to reach the companies that are engaged already in some kind of green transition, mainly focusing on circular economy and collaboration between companies. So we are underway with that, and also with interviews with employees, how they experience opportunities and risks in working life as they work in businesses engaged in this green and digital transitions. And we will also, during the project, have conversations with educational actors to learn more how they pick up on the needs for changes, skills, and knowledge to go into these transitions. So Vestlandsforsking, that's where I am working. I'm the project leader here. We are 7 or 8 researchers here, and there are 2 researchers from Norce, another research institute in Bergen, and then we are very happy to work with Steve and Jennifer at Cambridge Industrial Innovation Policy Unit, or IFM Engage. And for this webinar, we will sum up the findings of the first part of the project, the policy project. The photos you can see on this slide is the top one is all the researchers gathering for the first meeting we had in February 2024. And the second photo is from a visit only 2 weeks ago to biogas installation in our region. So that's part of our field work. Yes, I think that's it from me at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilde. So now I'm going to present the key findings from the review that we conducted. So just to give you a little bit of background. We were interested in understanding how European and international organizations talk about the digital and the green transitions. And this is important for the project that we are conducting, because obviously European and international organizations have a lot of influence and inform the policies that national governments and how national governments talk and respond to these transitions. So in my presentation, I will describe briefly the methodology that we follow in this review. Then I will discuss how we understood the definitions that European and international organizations are using in relation to these transitions. Then I will present the key themes that we identified that are discussed in how the transitions are changing working life. We also identified key policy areas on how to support inclusive and sustainable transitions. And then I will conclude my presentation with a more critical insights on what we call competing narratives. And these are just the stories on how these transitions are framed, what are the main issues that are being framed, and how these are being framed, and what could be the pathways forward for having like more inclusive and sustainable transitions. So for this part of the work that we are doing for this project, we conducted different interviews with representatives from international organizations, some of who are joining us today. But we also reviewed 97 policy documents or policy-related documents that included policy briefs, policy reports, regulations, foresight reports, council recommendations, declarations, among other types of documents. So how international and European organizations are describing these transitions? When they talk about the digital transition, usually they describe it as the adoption of digital technologies across various structures or systems and processes. It is understood or described as mainly led by the private sectors, and some of the main drivers are increasing productivity, efficiency, competitiveness. It is also described in comparison with the green and the twin transitions at a more advanced stage. When these organizations talk about the green transition, usually mean the shift towards resource-efficient economies and societies. This transition is described as mainly led by the public sector, but obviously the private sector is quite important also in this transition. And when they talk about the interaction of the green and the digital transition, we realize that it's a very recent debate, a very recent discussion. It's really in their early stages, and usually what they mean is how digital technologies can support the green transition, or also how we could address the environmental impacts of the use of digital technologies. Overall, there is some consensus that we want these transitions to be just and inclusive, to be human-centric. However, how organizations talk about what is a justice or a just transition differs depending on their mandates. These are the 5 key themes that we identified on how organizations talk about how transitions are changing working life. The first one is evolving skill demands. The second one is labor shift. Then we have reconfiguration of the workplace and work relationships. Then new risks and opportunities in occupational health and safety. And the last one is inclusion and exclusion dynamics. And now I will describe briefly each of these themes, what were the key insights that we found. So it was interesting to see how you responded to the poll that we presented at the beginning of the webinar. So many of you mentioned that some of the key themes that were discussed were climate change, were data, policy. However, it was interesting that not many of you selected the skills. And in our review, we found that skills was for much the most discussed theme. In some of the documents, this word was used more than 1,000 times, but overall, it was used more than 11,000 times in the documents that we review. So skills are presented, having the right skills that are demanded by the labor market are presented as enablers for people to participate in these transitions in a more inclusive way. However, lacking the skills that are needed are presented also as barriers. What was also interesting from the analysis that we conducted was finding how different organizations are highlighting how the changes that we are seeing in the demand for skills are outpacing the skills development efforts, and how some population groups are lagging behind in these efforts. What was also interesting was to find that in many of the discussions in terms of these green and digital transitions, the discussion centered on how the main changes are expected in mid-level skills, And I will come back to this point in the next slide. But also was interesting to see how, in comparison with digital skills, there seems to be a more limited understanding on what are green skills, what are the green skills that are needed by the labor market, but also what is a green job. There doesn't seem to be an agreement of what is a green job, for example. In terms of labor shifts, and here we mean both creation and destruction of jobs, but also how this may emerge in different regions and sectors. It was interesting to see how the discussion, for example, in terms of the digital transition, have changed. It has shifted. At the beginning, most of the discussion was centered on how this massive job displacement will be affecting many people, but now there seems to be a more nuanced narrative, and the emphasis tends to center around skills and polarization of work. It is interesting also to see how, in terms of the green transition, the discussion is more focused and more localized on specific sectors and regions. And in terms of the interaction of this digital and green transition, I come back to this point about the mid-skilled jobs. There is some expectation that perhaps the jobs that will be created as a result of the green transition may partly offset those that may disappear as a result of the digital transition. Particularly from the perspective of the digital transition, there is a lot of expectation and a lot of already of analysis of how the digital transition is changing the workplace and work relationships. And some of the opportunities and risks that are highlighted in this are, for example, flexibility, lower entry barriers, autonomy. An interesting finding was to see how digital technologies are also being leveraged for workers to organize themselves. However, there are also concerns of how, for example, now with the recent developments on AI, algorithm management could be also impacting the working life and particularly power imbalances in the workplace. It was also interesting to see how, when there is some discussion about the interaction of the digital and the green transition, the discussion tends to center on the undermining role of social dialogue actors. And this is both in terms of the digital transition and how non-standard forms of work tend to be less likely to organize in unions, but also overall how in the last decades, we have seen a decrease in trade union density, for example, among OECD countries. However, there are also interesting examples that we will include in the report that will be published in March that present how different collective agreements are already considering clauses on how to incorporate issues related with the digital and the green transition in their collective agreements. And this goes from aspects related with the right to disconnect, health and safety issues, reskilling and upskilling, but also what does it mean to have like a more a greener workplace, and what other considerations could be included. Most of these are mainly related to reducing the work times, for example, reducing the working week to 4 days, or perhaps how to incentivize workers to adopt more ecological practices. Related to this, obviously, as the workplace is changing and there are new configurations of work, there are also new risks for occupational health and safety, but there are also opportunities to have safer and more decent jobs. So some of the concerns are related with how workers will be exposed to new machines, new equipment, and new materials. And in terms of the interaction of these two transitions, is really about how these physical and psychosocial impacts may be compounded with each other. The last theme that we identified was related with inclusion and exclusion dynamics. When they talk about this theme in terms of the digital transition, usually the discussion focuses on job displacement and polarization, Whereas in the case of the green transition, the discussion tends to be broader. They usually talk about deepening regional inequalities, and particularly in carbon-intensive regions, which in many cases were already lagging behind. The discussion on the interaction of the digital and green transition, whereas it is not always explicit, generally we could understood it as deepening this job polarization, benefiting those with higher skills and perhaps having the most negative impacts among those with lower skills. There are many population groups that are highlighted as in disadvantage in these transitions, and there are many reasons for this. It could be gender norms, but also different types of barriers to participate in skills development and also in the labor market. Some of the groups that are highlighted in disadvantage in these transitions include people with disabilities, young people, elderly people, those from socioeconomically disadvantaged background, those with lower skill levels, but also women. I just want, to make a special focus on the gender aspect of this inclusion and exclusion dynamics. In general, in both the digital and green transitions, there are discussions of how women are underrepresented on fields that are relevant for these transitions and also in policy making. There are some concerns of gender bias in digital technologies, for example. There are also opportunities that are highlighted on how the digital technologies have facilitated the participation of women in the labor market. However, there are also concerns on how this facilitation by digital technologies could be also increasing time poverty for women, work precarity, and reinforcing traditional gender roles. In terms of the policies that we identified to support inclusive and sustainable transitions, we focus on 4 key areas. And these are, in general, different areas and different policy instruments that could be used to shape more inclusive and sustainable transitions. The first one is related to understanding observable and potential impacts. From the analysis that we conducted, we observed that there is a lot of uncertainty of what are the potential impacts of these transitions, particularly from the green transition and the interaction between both. So some policy instruments that are recommended by these organizations include systematic labor market analysis and skills monitoring, foresight analysis, but in general, different types of analysis to try to understand what are the impacts that we are observing, but also what are the potential impacts that we will observe in the future. There is also another area that we identified that is focused on providing direct support for addressing the challenges and opportunities for individuals, households, and business. And this covers a broad range of policy instruments from active labor policies, skills development, but also entrepreneurship and business support, including support for social enterprises and also social protection. The third area that we identified is related with social dialogue. This theme was highlighted in many of the documents that we reviewed and also in the interviews that we conducted. Social dialogue is emphasized as a way to ensure that the initiatives include diverse voices, and some of the mechanisms that are discussed in this area include skills and advisory councils, framework agreements, collective agreements, and the sharing of best practices. There is also a lot of discussion of how this is a very complex issue, how the transitions are really covering different aspects of working life and in general people's lives, and how important it is to create an enabling environment. And in this area, policy instruments that are discussed range from standards and regulations, but also investing in infrastructure, particularly in the most disadvantaged regions. And it is also highlighted the importance of policy coordination that is currently not existing in all the cases, and the policy frameworks that can facilitate this coordination. An interesting discussion that we found in some cases is also how important is, as part of creating this enabling environment, is to try to rethink and to change how we talk about progress and how we measure country progress as well. And I just want to conclude my presentation discussing these competing narratives and what could be the pathway forward. So we identify these dominant narratives that are really these are kind of the prevailing stories and how they are framed different issues related to the green and the digital transition. So we recognize that obviously skill shortages are a pressing issue, are very important to be addressed by governments, by education organizations, and also by companies. However, what we also found is that perhaps the overemphasis on skills and may risk neglecting structural barriers that are impeding different population groups to participate in skills development efforts and also in the labor market. In terms of the discussion on inclusion, what we found is that perhaps there is also a focus more on preventing and mitigating inequalities that may risk really leveraging this transformation, these transitions to have like a more profound societal and economical transformations and having rather than only preventing or mitigating inequalities to really having a more inclusive perspective. And related to this, in general, we found that the digital and the green transitions are framed within business as usual systems, both from an economic and societal side. And perhaps, again, this is missing an opportunity to create new economic models, to shape also business incentives, and to rethink how we measure progress and how we define country progress as well. The discussion of just transitions was also quite interesting, but perhaps a question that emerged from the analysis was justice for who? In general, we found that the discussion on justice is set within the national and regional boundaries in the case of European organizations. But perhaps considering how we are seeing the different geopolitical tensions currently evolving, perhaps this is an opportunity to emphasize how countries need from each other, how we need from each other, and perhaps broaden this discussion about justice in terms of global justice and solidarity. Then another aspect that we identified is that obviously there is a lot of uncertainty. There is very limited knowledge of what we can expect and what may be the different impacts of these transitions. And there is a lot of work that is being done in terms of risk management, trying to understand what could be the different impacts, what could be the skills that are needed, for example. But perhaps here, again, there is an opportunity to having a more inclusive perspective in this area. And rather than trying to control the future, actually trying to navigate this uncertainty and including local organizations, including communities in shaping these scenarios, but also learning how communities have navigated uncertainty for centuries. And finally, the point on twin transitions. We started this project talking about these twin transitions, and these twin transitions have become also kind of a buzzword. However, as the project has evolved, we also found, and we confirmed this in different interviews, that perhaps these are not really twin transitions. In some of the discussions, some of the research participants mentioned perhaps these are just sister transitions. They have many differences. They have different types of drivers. It is true that they are interacting, but at the same time, they are interacting with different other socioeconomic transformations. For example, it is really impossible to think about the green and digital transition without thinking about the demographic change that many of our countries are facing. So perhaps a more systematic understanding and moving away of twin transitions, or being very careful of how we talk about these twin transitions may be more useful for these discussions. And yeah, we'll finish my presentation here. And yeah, we are looking forward to hear your views, your comments and feedback on this work.
Thank you all for taking part. But now I'd like to hand over to Hilde to give us a little bit of a finish.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you everybody who came here today to participate. And speaking from our side, from the project side, it's been very interesting to work on the policy perspective, to learn how policies see these twin or not twin green and digital transitions do different things, and to learn about how, or to see more clearly how they are sort of shaped around more the individual for the digital and more around regions and industries for the green. So already there to start with, there are some differences in terms of how these policies have the ability to actually make changes. But I also want to look from the policies and forward towards the rest of this research project, where the aim of having this policy study in the project has been to understand how policies are a part of the narrative that comes down into the companies for the employers and for the employees. So there we are just starting to do that unpacking of how the narratives are translated or not. Maybe they are invisible. So I think also in this report, I also find the discussion of the dominant narratives versus the alternative narratives. That's sort of where things open up and becomes really interesting in terms of how we can produce something different for the future. And I expect that we will see much more alternative ways of seeing it when we enter into the fieldwork more. So I will open for anyone else from the project who want to make comments to. Yes, we have a new website. It's up and running. It's mainly in Norwegian, but it's partly in English. But I think I'm very happy with the work that Jennifer mainly has done in this first part of the project. It's been very good to have. It makes a very good platform for the project to continue the work, to have this knowledge of how policies create narratives and discourses which are producing possibilities and barriers. So that's that's my main thank you to Jennifer for that work.
So I wonder if I can call this to a close by encouraging us all to be inclusive. It's been wonderful having you all in the same room together, and we can communicate continuously, digitally. So please take the opportunity. If you felt a bit shy or you felt a bit interested about something, but it's really not something you want to explore in front of a large room, there is an encouragement. Get in contact with us. We've already talked with a lot of you in the room, and we've found a lot of your thoughts and ideas fascinating. They couldn't all be presented in a small number of slides today. You were not ignored, I guarantee it, and your thoughts are going to be part of the analysis and thinking going forward. And we welcome even more help, commentary, and interference from all of you. And I think I'm looking at Hilde and Jennifer in particular. Unless there's a final thought, we're going to give you an entire minute to get ready for your next meeting. How generous. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Steve.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.